I thought this was supposed to be a relaxing weekend getaway, but here I was, wedged in the back seat with a sinking feeling that we were heading straight into something I wanted no part of. The trees on either side of the road grew thicker and darker, like we were driving into the mouth of some enormous beast. I glanced around at my friends, already mentally assigning them the roles they'd likely play in whatever scenario we were getting ourselves into. Jackson, our classic jock, sprawled out in the front seat, was completely unfazed by the eerie vibes settling around us. He tossed me a carefree grin in the rearview mirror, then went back to scrolling on his phone, laughing at his jokes. Figures. He'd be the one to charge headfirst into things, convinced his sheer biceps were enough to keep him safe from whatever might be lurking around. Then there was Brianna, dressed like she was going clubbing instead of heading to a cabin. Hoop earrings, crop top, the whole 9 yards. I liked Brianna, but I knew she'd be the one to pause and fix her lip gloss at the worst possible time. A recipe for disaster. Beside me sat Malcolm, our know-it-all. He'd been spouting fun facts about the area since we hit the road, apparently thrilled that this place was the site of multiple disappearances. Real comforting, he'd be the type to dig into everyone's motives and theories, only to miss the obvious signs around him. And then there was Layla, who rolled her eyes every time I voiced a single concern. The skeptic. I could already tell she'd be poking fun at me all weekend, never entirely lie convinced that anything was wrong until she was face to face with it. And me, I knew better. I'd be paying attention, taking every little warning sign seriously. Because unlike the rest of them, I had every intention of returning from this weekend in one piece. Assuming they'd listen to me, the car finally pulled up to the cabin driveway, which seemed about a mile from the actual front door, and my unease ratcheted up a notch. Plus, I barely had any cell phone reception. This place didn't look like the cozy getaway we'd been promised. The cabin sat there looming in the dim light, its weathered wood, peeling paint, and filthy windows giving it an air of abandonment and neglect. If I didn't know better, I'd think we'd just arrived at the set of Nightmare on Elm Street. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice casual. Maybe we should keep the car running? Jackson laughed, shoving me lightly. MC, you worry way too much. This place is perfect for the weekend. I bit back my usual sarcastic reply, trying again, but what if we need to leave in a hurry? Layla sighed, rolling her eyes like she'd been waiting for this moment. This isn't a horror movie, MC. Chill out. My phone buzzed and I glanced down to see my ex Derek's name flash on the screen. I ignored it, slipping my phone back into my pocket. Layla gave me a curious look and I just shrugged, whispering, "He's been weirdly obsessed with calling me lately. I thought we broke up, but he missed that memo." Layla rolled her eyes, shaking her head as she chuckled. The rest of them chuckled, and I sighed, glancing back at the car. Keeping an exit strategy ready was just common sense. But predictably, they'd already decided I was being paranoid. We filed inside. If I thought the outside was creepy, the inside was sinister. The furniture was ancient, the wallpaper was peeling and faded, and there were portraits on the walls of people who looked like they'd never smiled a day in their lives. Their eyes seemed to follow us as we moved around the room. Great. "Let's check out the rooms," Brianna chirped, already wandering down the dark hallway, her phone flashlight lighting her way poorly. "Maybe we should stay together, just in case," I suggested, raising a cautious hand. But Brianna was already gone, and the others didn't even look back at me. Jackson was heading straight for the basement door, and Malcolm was inspecting some dusty old bookshelves. Layla disappeared toward the kitchen. They were all laughing, poking around like this place was some fantastic, rustic attraction. I clenched my jaw, watching them ignore me yet again. Classic horror trope, the smart friend that nobody listened to, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something here was very wrong. I took a steadying breath, muttering to myself, and suddenly, it felt like I was speaking to someone else, someone who might get what I was feeling right now. Hey listener, here's rule number 1, trust the smart friend. I glanced around, half listening to my friends laughing in distant parts of the cabin. Every horror movie has that one person who sees things for what they are, yet nobody listens to them. That's me. But here's the deal. If you ever find yourself in a creepy cabin, remember this. The person telling you to stick together and keep the car running, that's your MVP. I shook my head, letting out a quiet, bitter laugh. Of course my friends aren't hearing any of this, I muttered, glancing around the room again. So let's just say, I hope someone out there's listening. I rejoined my friends, fully aware that I would be the only one looking out for all of us. We'd barely been in the cabin for an hour when Layla called out, waving a dusty, tattered journal she'd found on a shelf. "Hey, check it out, creepy old book alert." I felt my stomach drop. Maybe don't open it, I suggested, the words slipping out before I could stop myself. My mind flashed with every horror movie scenario possible. This was a setup if I'd ever seen one. Malcolm slung an arm around my shoulders, chuckling as he shook his head. MC, this is just the stuff people make up to mess with tourists. There's nobody out here and nobody getting murdered. I glanced around, hoping for some support, even a flicker of agreement, but the others just brushed me off, laughing as they passed the book around like a twisted joke. But after some time, they agreed to return the journal to its original place. As they laughed, I subtly stepped aside, finding a shadowed corner. Hey listener, here's rule number 2. If you find a creepy old journal full of murder stories, you don't read it, and you don't stay in the place where it was written. I sighed, pressing my back against the wall as my friend's laughter echoed through the cabin, the sound bouncing off the walls in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I could have sworn I felt something, a prickle on my skin like someone else was listening, someone other than me. My eyes scanned the room one last time, and I only hoped that whoever was listening, they were on my side. It took 10 seconds for my friends to brush off my suggestion that we stick together and wander around the cabin. I'd barely finished saying, maybe we should just stay in the living room together. Safety in numbers? Before Layla was heading down a dark hallway, eyes gleaming excitedly. Come on, y'all, we need to check this place out, she called, already on her way to what she had dramatically deemed the creepy old attic. I rolled my eyes, that familiar pit of dread settling low in my stomach. Or we could stay in the living room where it's, I don't know, less creepy? Jackson snickered, grabbing the flashlight and shining it under his chin in a mock horror pose. You're such a scaredy cat, MC. It's a cabin in the woods, not a haunted house. I shot him a look, which is exactly why we don't need to split up, I said, enunciating each word. But as usual, my logic was met with laughter. The others were already wandering off, curiosity winning out over common sense. Layla turned back, grinning as she waved us along. Come on, MC, this weekend's supposed to be fun, don't be the killjoy. They scattered, each of them disappearing into different parts of the cabin. Brianna headed for the creaky staircase leading upstairs. Jackson bolted straight to the basement door, and Malcolm, true to form, lingered over an old map hanging on the wall, muttering something about historical significance. I sighed, mostly to myself, muttering, great plan, guys. Just split up in an isolated, creepy cabin. What could possibly go wrong? Eventually, everyone trickled back into the living room, each person carrying some strange souvenir they'd found in different corners of the cabin. Jackson proudly displayed a cracked mirror he'd dragged from the basement, claiming it was vintage. Brianna had found a dusty old scarf in one of the upstairs bedrooms and was busy wrapping it around her neck and striking poses. Layla had put on an ancient-looking hat, and Malcolm, looking utterly pleased with himself, was glued to an old book he'd found upstairs, the spine so cracked it looked ready to crumble. As the night wore on, the drinks started flowing freely. Brianna took the lead on pouring shots, and it didn't take long for the room to fill with laughter and bad jokes. I tried to keep my wits about me, nursing my drink as I watched them slip into their drunken haze. Even I was starting to feel the effects, and, against my better judgment, I was starting to let myself relax. All right, let's do something fun, Brianna announced, stumbling over to the coffee table with a mischievous grin. Truth or dare anyone. Oh, we're doing this? I muttered under my breath, fighting the urge to roll my eyes, but I couldn't help but smile as they entered the game, passing dares and secrets like we were still in high school. For a minute, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this weekend could be fun, but as I watched them laugh and cheer, that nagging feeling returned, a sense of being watched from the shadows beyond the windows. I glanced over, half expecting to see something lurking just outside, but there was nothing there, just the endless stretch of dark forest swallowing up the light from the cabin. Eventually, the game died down, and the group fell into a comfortable, boozy silence, each person lost in their tipsy thoughts. That's when I heard it. A faint sound, like the crunch of gravel just outside. I froze, every instinct going on high alert as I strained to hear more. Did anyone else hear that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Malcolm sprawled out on the couch and waved a dismissive hand. Probably just a raccoon or something. Relax, MC. You're too jumpy. But I couldn't take my eyes off the window. The sound came again, louder this time, closer. I squinted into the dark, half sure I'd seen movement. A flicker of something just beyond the reach of the porch light. My heart thundered in my chest, and I could feel that prickling sensation along my skin that told me something was wrong. Then Jackson, clearly emboldened by the alcohol, stood up. All right, I'm checking it out, he announced, grabbing the flashlight and heading for the door like he was on some heroic mission. No, don't, I said, grabbing his arm as he passed. Jackson, maybe we should all stay inside and lock the doors? Jackson laughed, shaking me off with a grin. It's fine, MC, you worry way too much. And with that, he swung open the door, stepping out onto the porch with a dramatic sweep of his flashlight. I held my breath, my fists clenched as I watched him. For a moment, all I could hear was the sound of my heartbeat as Jackson scanned the yard, his flashlight casting eerie shadows across the trees. And then from the darkness it appeared. A tall figure, face obscured by a mask, stepped out from the shadows like something straight out of a nightmare. They raised a hand, moving toward Jackson with a slow, ominous stride. Get inside, I shouted, my voice cracking with panic. Jackson's grin vanished as he stumbled back, tripping over his feet as he scrambled for the door. He slammed it shut behind him, his face pale as he gasped. There's someone out there. My heart felt like it might burst as I locked the door behind him, turning to the others with wide, terrified eyes. We need to leave, now. But instead of agreeing, they just stared at me, clearly not getting the urgency. Come on, MC, Brianna scoffed, rolling her eyes. It was probably just some weird hiker or something. I stared at her, dumbfounded. A weird hiker in a mask? Malcolm chuckled, shaking his head. It's late, we're all a little drunk, and we're in the middle of nowhere. There's probably a logical explanation. I clenched my jaw, frustration boiling as I realized none of them took this seriously. Was I the only one here who could see this wasn't normal? Hey listener, rule number 24, never stay in the place where the killer was last seen. I dropped my voice to a whisper as though I were sharing a dark, sarcastic secret. If there's a masked figure outside your cabin at night, you don't brush it off, you don't debate it, you don't try to explain it away, you leave. Every word came out sharp, pointed, and yet here I am, I continued, sarcasm thick. Here I am in the middle of nowhere with friends who would rather ignore every warning sign than listen to reason. I let out a resigned sigh. Look, if you're taking notes, remember this. When things start getting weird, you don't sit around rationalizing. You run. With one last look at my friends, who were still discussing logical explanations, like it wasn't a matter of life and death, I knew I was in for a long night. Despite everything I'd seen and said, my friends decided the safest plan was to stay indoors, where they felt secure. They locked the doors, shut the curtains, and insisted we'd be fine if we stayed inside. We're just spooked from all the scary stories we were telling earlier, Malcolm assured me, trying to sound confident as he sank back onto the couch. We're safe here. Let's hang out and let it go. You can't be serious, I muttered, staring at him like he'd sprouted a second head. Was I the only one seeing what was going on here? Brianna, still lounging on the couch with her drink, shrugged. MC, you're always so paranoid. Look, we're all locked up. We're fine. She gave me a reassuring smile, but it was laced with a hint of condescension. I clenched my jaw, my patience stretched thin. I could feel the danger in the air like an electric current running under my skin. But as I looked around at my friends, lounging like we were at some summer vacation home, I knew I couldn't get through to them. With one last glance toward the door, I muttered, they never learn. But a chilling thought crept over me, leaving me on edge. If they kept ignoring these warning signs, we might not make it through the night. I took a deep breath, determined to rally the group and keep us on track. We'd already made it through a dozen mistakes, but maybe, just maybe, we could still save ourselves if we kept it together. First things first, I pulled out my phone, praying I'd see a couple of bars at least, anything to call for help, but as soon as I tapped the screen, my heart sank. 0 bars, no service. It's just a screen taunting me with dead silence. Wait, I said slowly, feeling the weight of our situation settle over me. Why aren't you guys trying to see if you have any phone reception? They exchanged glances, the look on their faces far too guilty for my comfort. They're in the car? Brianna replied, wincing slightly like she knew exactly how I'd react. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, calming breath through my nose, hoping that somehow, magically, this nightmare would end when I opened them. But no, here we were. Of course they're in the car, because who would possibly need their phone in a creepy cabin, right? We wanted to experience nature without our phones this weekend, Brianna said. Hey listener, rule number 17, keep your damn phone on you. I don't care if you're a 2-minute walk away or a 2-second walk, never leave it behind, especially when you're out in the woods and the vibes are screaming trouble. I shook my head, muttering as I scanned their faces. But nope, here we are, one bad decision after another. Why not just put a sign over the cabin saying, please come get us while we're at it? The group gave me blank stares and I sighed, looking down at my now useless phone, my last flicker of hope fading fast. After a few tense moments, we decided the best option was to make a break for the car about 100 yards away. It was far enough to make my heart race, but if we moved quietly, we might get there without drawing attention. I laid out the plan, begging everyone to stick to the strategy. "All right," I whispered, "we're sticking together and keeping quiet. No sudden movements, no loud noises, okay?" I made eye contact with each of them, hoping it would show my seriousness. They all nodded, though some looked more ready than others. We took our first cautious steps outside, and I could already feel the weight of the woods pressing down on us, shadows stretching long and dark around the cabin. But as we made it a few steps from the porch, Brianna froze, her head snapping to the side as her eyes widened in panic. A slight sharp sound echoed from the woods, a rustling, maybe just an animal. But to Brianna, it was something much worse. Her breath caught and she let out a small yelp, her gaze darting from shadow to shadow as she took a shaky step backward. "Brianna, stay calm," I hissed, but she barely heard me, her breaths growing fast and loud. And suddenly her nerves shattered. She let out a piercing scream and bolted, shrieking at the top of her lungs as she dashed into the woods like a terrified deer, sprinting blindly into the trees. "Brianna, no," I yelled after her, but it was useless. She was already gone, a blonde blur of panic and glitter vanishing into the shadows, her scream echoing through the dark. I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face. "And there goes stealth," I muttered, looking around at the others who stared back at me in shock, each realizing our already thin plan had become much riskier. The woods were silent again, except for Brianna's distant screams echoing in the darkness. I clenched my fists, feeling my gut twist as her voice grew fainter and fainter. I wanted to run after her, to do something, but I knew charging blindly into the woods wouldn't help anyone. Then the screaming stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. I glanced around at my friends, each of their faces reflecting that same realization, the kind you only have when you're finally forced to admit that something is very, very wrong. "Brianna?" Malcolm called, his voice trembling. Nothing. Layla hugged herself, looking back at me with wide eyes. "MC, what do we do?" I swallowed hard, fighting to stay calm, but in the back of my mind, all I could think was that our friend was gone. She had panicked, bolted, and now, well, she wasn't returning. Hey listener, rule number 14. When you're in a horror movie scenario, do not, under any circumstances, run off screaming into the woods. Because guess what? You won't come back. I turned back to my friends, still standing there lost in shock. It was becoming clearer by the second that if I didn't take charge, they were going to get us all killed. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm even as my frustration bubbled. It was time to lay down some rules if we could make it out of here alive. "Listen up," I said, my voice sharp enough to snap them back to attention. "From now on, I'm calling the shots. No more running off, no more screaming, and no more ignoring basic survival instincts. Got it?" They nodded, looking a little more focused, but I could see the fear and confusion still lingering in their eyes. I sighed, glancing down for a moment before tilting my head slightly, letting my voice drop to mutter as I broke the fourth wall. "All right, for those of you keeping track, here's how you handle a panicked friend in a horror scenario," I whispered. "Rule number 5, don't waste time reasoning with them. Get them to safety and, if necessary, physically drag them if that's what it takes." I shook my head, feeling my irritation peak as I looked back at the group. Trust me, if we keep this up, we're not getting out of here in one piece. With that, I turned back to my friends, forcing a grim smile as I stepped forward. Let's try this again, but we stick together this time. No more messing around. After the chaos in the woods and Brianna's disappearance, we returned to the cabin, all on edge. I took a deep breath, knowing that we'd probably be goners by dawn if I didn't take charge. It was time to lay out a plan that hopefully didn't involve any more split-second decisions or woodland sprints. "All right, listen up," I said, addressing my remaining friends with the best let's not die tone I could muster. "First, we need to barricade the doors and stay as quiet as possible. I don't know what's out there, but it's safer to make it look like nobody's home." Layla crossed her arms, giving me a skeptical look. "So, we're just supposed to sit here, hiding and doing nothing?" Yeah, exactly," I replied, pinning her with a look. "When someone's trying to kill you, doing nothing is underrated. Silence and invisibility, that's how you survive." But Jackson, who decided he was MacGyver for the night, had another idea. "Actually," he said, glancing around, "what if we, Set up some traps. I squinted at him, half sure he was joking. Traps? Yeah, like in Home Alone, he said, his eyes lighting up. You know, make the place impossible for anyone without getting wrecked. Booby traps everywhere. Oh, great, I muttered, pinching the bridge of my nose, because a killer is going to be thrown off by a bucket of paint swinging from the ceiling. But Jackson was already on a roll, rattling off his genius ideas. We could put a tripwire over there by the door, a bunch of sharp objects by the windows, maybe some nails on the floor. I glanced at Malcolm and Layla, hoping for backup, but they nodded along, looking intrigued. I groaned inwardly. Or we could just, I don't know, barricade the doors and sit still? Come on, MC, Jackson replied, grinning. This'll work. We'll make it so he can't get within 10 feet of us without regretting it. I sighed, feeling my sensible plan unravel. Fine, but if any of these so-called traps backfire, I'm holding you personally responsible. Against my better judgment, we spent the next 20 minutes booby-trapping the cabin. Jackson and Malcolm went all out, rigging tripwires with empty cans and string and scattering various sharp objects by the windows. They even set up a chair precariously balanced with a stack of heavy books above it, ready to topple on anyone who opened the door. I watched them, a skeptical eyebrow raised, but I figured it was better than nothing if it kept them occupied and quiet. Finally, we settled in, all of us crouched low and doing our best to stay out of sight. But the peace didn't last long. Suddenly there was a loud crash as the pile of books toppled from the door and landed directly on Jackson's head. Ah! Ow! He yelped, rubbing his head and looking around wildly. His scream echoed through the cabin, followed by the clattering of tin cans and the loud scrape of the chair being knocked out of place. I looked at him, aghast. You set off your trap! He winced, rubbing his head. It was an accident. Oh yeah, and that's gonna make it so much better when it alerts whoever or whatever is out there, I muttered, glancing at the windows, half expecting to see a masked figure peering in. Hey listener, rule number 46. When you're barricading yourself from a killer, maybe don't set traps that can backfire on you. Because seriously, now all we've done is make ourselves a really loud target. Just as we tried resetting everything, the unmistakable creak of footsteps sounded outside. I froze, my heart racing as the heavy steps came closer, stopping just outside the door. I gestured for everyone to stay quiet, hoping against hope that maybe the killer passed by, but then the killer kicked the door open like it was cardboard. I held my breath, every muscle tense, as the door slowly creaked open, and there they were, the killer, masked and looming, stepping into the room like they owned the place. The figure paused, their gaze sweeping across the room, and I could feel the collective fear spike in the air. I looked at everyone, whispering, "Hide now?" But of course Jackson, ever the hero, wasn't about to listen. He grabbed a nearby chair, lifting it like some medieval knight preparing for battle. "Jackson, what are you doing?" I hissed. "Taking him down," Jackson replied, squaring his shoulders. "We're not just gonna sit here." He charged forward before I could stop him, raising a chair above his head. He let out a wild battle cry as he swung it toward the killer, but the killer sidestepped effortlessly, sending Jackson stumbling right past him, off balance and defenseless. The killer moved with swift, terrifying precision, grabbing Jackson by the arm and wrenching him backward. Jackson barely had time to let out a strangled yell before the killer drove his weapon forward. The impact was brutal and final. Jackson's body slumped, his face frozen in shock before he crumpled to the floor. The cabin fell silent, the brutal reality sinking in as we stared in horror. My heart thundered in my chest, but my frustration simmered beneath the fear, a sharp pang of anger cutting through me. With Jackson down, the rest of us sprang into action. I grabbed Layla's arm, pulling her toward the back door as I yelled, "Run!" Chaos erupted as we scrambled, the killer's footsteps thundering behind us. Malcolm, proving yet again that survival wasn't his strongest suit, bolted toward the kitchen instead of following us, knocking over a stack of pots and pans that clattered noisily to the floor. Each sound echoed through the cabin like a dinner bell for our masked intruder. We made it to the back door, but as I pushed Layla through, I turned back to see the killer zeroing in on Malcolm. Panic gripped me, but so did a sick sense of inevitability. No plan, no strategy, just a desperate scramble. Hey listener, rule number 37, if you're going to face the killer, do it with a plan. Otherwise, all you're doing is wasting time. Because trying to fight a killer without a real plan, it's fucking stupid. I turned back in time to see Malcolm trip over his own feet, crashing to the ground just as the killer loomed over him. My heart dropped, but I gritted my teeth and grabbed Layla's arm, pushing her farther ahead. I swear, if we make it out of this, I'm picking new friends. Layla and I exchanged a quick, desperate glance, both of us knowing we couldn't leave Malcolm to his fate. I gestured to a nearby window, and Layla nodded, catching on to the plan immediately. "Hey, she yelled, banging on the window frame, her voice echoing sharply through the night. The killer's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing in our direction. I joined in, yelling and waving my arms to draw his attention, making as much noise as possible. "Over here, you creep!" Malcolm seized the moment, scrambling back to his feet and stumbling away as the killer sprinted towards the back door. As the killer closed in, I grabbed Layla's arm, pulling her back from the window just in time. We bolted, Malcolm barely standing up as we dashed around the side of the house, hoping Malcolm would meet us at the front door. Layla stumbled, but I yanked her up, urging her forward as we rounded the corner and saw the front door just ahead. We pushed harder, desperation fueling every stride. Just as we reached the porch, I could feel the killer's presence right behind us, his shadow looming. We practically crashed into the door, scrambling inside as Malcolm, already there, slammed it shut behind us. The killer's face appeared in the small window just as the door clicked into place, and I felt a surge of relief, watching his frustrated glare through the glass. For now, we were safe. With every hour that ticked by, the tension in the cabin climbed. After the fiasco with Jackson's traps and the killer's unexpected visit, our group felt smaller, more fragile. Fear has a way of bringing out the worst in people, and in our case, it meant we were turning on each other faster than you could say bad idea. "Why didn't you lock the back door?" Layla snapped at Malcolm, her voice high and panicked. "Oh, so now it's my fault?" Malcolm shot back, his eyes wide and wild. "You're the one who suggested we split up in the first place." Layla threw her hands up, scoffing. "If you hadn't been so busy analyzing every little detail, maybe we'd have focused on survival instead of playing detective." Malcolm's face reddened. "Oh, please, Layla, you've been doubting every single suggestion anyone's made since we got here. Maybe if you'd trusted someone for once, we wouldn't be sitting ducks right now." I sighed, feeling the cracks in our so-called unity deepening by the second. "Hey, can we maybe not rip each other apart while there's a killer stalking us?" I said, trying to cut through the noise. But they weren't hearing me. Malcolm was still ranting about Layla's skepticism, and Layla was fuming back at him, both of them too wrapped up in their blame game to focus. Meanwhile, I was busy keeping an eye on the windows, hoping we weren't about to get another unwanted visit. But if there's one thing I'd learned, it's that fighting each other was as dangerous as any killer lurking outside. "Look," I said, raising my voice, "we need to stick together." I might as well have been talking to the walls. I had a sinking feeling this group was going to collapse faster than a house of cards in a windstorm. "Hey listener, let me tell you something about survival. Rule number 19, when you're in a horror situation, you blame the killer, not each other. I get it, we're all scared and fear makes people act crazy, but fighting with your friends while a killer's on the loose, that's not just bad teamwork, it's suicide." I sighed, glancing back at my friends who were still bickering, each blaming the other for the mess we were in. So listener, if you're ever in this situation, and I sincerely hope you're not, remember that blaming each other only makes things worse. In fact, I'd bet that's exactly what the killer's counting on. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Malcolm did something that felt straight out of a bad nightmare. He looked around the room, took a deep breath, and muttered, "Maybe if one of us makes a distraction, the rest can slip out unnoticed." Layla and I both stared at him, realizing what he was suggesting. A sick feeling settled in my stomach as Malcolm's eyes darted toward Layla. She took a step back, her expression twisted with shock. "Are you seriously trying to suggest one of us be the bait?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and outrage. Malcolm's face was flushed, his voice defensive. "I'm just saying if it's between survival and whatever happens if we just sit here, maybe it's worth considering." I shot Malcolm a look, my voice dripping with sarcasm, because nothing says I'm a dead man walking quite like a traitor in a survival scenario. Malcolm, clearly picking up on the hostile vibes from both Layla and me, shifted uncomfortably, looking away. "Look, I was scared, okay?" he mumbled, his tone a little too defensive. After everything that had gone down, the group was officially fractured. Layla had pulled back, keeping her distance from Malcolm, who was pacing the cabin, casting suspicious glances at both of us. Even I was struggling to see how we could pull together after all the tension and mistrust. The air in the cabin felt thick, everyone glancing over their shoulder as if their own friends might turn on them. I took a deep breath, looking around at the disaster our little team had become. I could almost imagine the killer out there in the woods, laughing at us, delighted by how easy we were making this. "Hey listener, you know how people in survival situations always start turning on each other, making everything way worse? Yeah, that's where we are right now. Rule number 25. In any scenario like this, trust is a lifeline. The second you let paranoia take over, you're handing the killer a victory on a silver platter. Because here's the truth, listener. The only way to survive is together. The moment you start betraying each other, you're as good as dead. Looking back at my friends, I could tell the damage was done. Malcolm's fear and distrust had planted a seed that wouldn't go away easily, and now we were all watching each other out of the corners of our eyes, wondering who might crack next. Fallout was real, and I knew our odds of survival had just plummeted. As I glanced toward the door, feeling the weight of dread settle over me, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all about to pay the price for letting fear tear us apart. I gathered my so-called friends around, doing my best to keep my voice steady despite the absolute dumpster fire of our situation. We'd been stalked, screamed at, chased, lost a few friends already, and now paranoia was eating away at any last scraps of rationality. But I had to try, so I took a deep breath and laid out my plan. "All right, here's what we're doing," I said, gripping a flashlight like it was my lifeline. "We're going out the back door, sticking to the tree line, and heading straight for the car. No stops, no turns, no yelling. We're not going to make a sound. Got it?" They nodded, though the looks on their faces didn't exactly inspire confidence. Malcolm, as expected, had to add his 2 cents. "Are we sure the killer won't just see us running? What if he's watching the car?" I forced myself not to roll my eyes. "The idea, Malcolm, is to move quickly and quietly using the shadows. If we argue about it, yeah, we'll get seen, so let's skip that part, okay?" But of course, it wasn't that simple. Layla shot Malcolm a glare. "Why are you always so negative? We need to focus, and you're not helping." "Oh, I'm not helping," Malcolm shot back, voice rising. "Who was it that screamed bloody murder in the woods and gave away our position?" Guys," I said, but they were too far down the rabbit hole to notice me. "Can we focus for 5 minutes, please?" "Malcolm, stop overthinking. Layla, try not to scream if a squirrel moves." I wanted to scream. The killer was out there stalking us, and my so-called teammates were in a full-on blame game. My carefully crafted escape plan was crumbling, and I felt like the only person with a hint of sanity left. Hey listener, if you're ever in a horror situation, Rule 37 is simple: teamwork. And that means actual teamwork, not whatever this is. I let my eyes roam over my friends, who were still bickering and arguing as if their lives didn't depend on it. Honestly, you'd think we were just out here playing a game of who can be the most annoying, because that's the only thing they're winning right now. I shook my head, adding, "So if you're taking notes, just remember this: failure of teamwork, it is a total death sentence in any horror movie scenario. And as you can see here, folks, we're giving a masterclass right now." I turned back to the group, forcing myself to step back into the role of a reluctant leader. "Are we good now? Can we try to get to the car without anyone blowing our cover?" After what felt like a lifetime, they finally nodded, and we prepared to move out. I just prayed they'd finally understand, shut up, and follow directions. To avoid the front door, we snuck through the back of the cabin and into the yard. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move at the yard's edge, the killer closing in fast. "Run!" I yelled, but it was as if they'd forgotten every survival tip I'd given them. Rule 43. Don't get clever when you're cornered. Stick to the basics, or the only thing you'll trap is yourself. I had barely finished my sentence when I heard a scream from Malcolm as the killer stuck their blade right through him. I turned back, eyes wide, feeling a sickening pit settle in my stomach as I realized we'd lost another friend. In the middle of the chaos, I forced myself to push forward, grabbing Layla by the arm and pulling her to her feet. "Come on," I whispered, urging her to keep moving. We didn't have time to mourn, time to regret. If we stopped even for a second, we'd be next. We stumbled through the trees, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. The killer's heavy footsteps echoed behind us, a reminder of how close they were and how little room for error we had. Every step felt like it could be our last, but I held on to a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could make it out of this. Once we distanced ourselves from the cabin, I allowed myself to catch my breath. I turned to Layla, who was trembling, looking like she was one wrong move from breaking down entirely. "Look," I said, keeping my voice low but firm, "we're going to make it out of this, okay? But only if you listen to me. No more traps, no more shouting, no more distractions. Got it?" She nodded, looking up at me with a flicker of hope. I turned away, hoping she'd keep that resolve for at least a few more minutes. Hey listener, I know this seems like the end, but here's the thing. Rule number 31, keep a shred of hope, because sometimes that's the only thing keeping you alive. I turned back to Layla, taking one last deep breath before motioning for us to keep moving. We were battered, we were exhausted, and we'd lost so much. But as long as we had even a shred of hope, I wasn't about to give up. "Run!" I hissed, and without another word, we bolted, racing back toward the house as fast as our legs could carry us, the fear of the killer right behind us pushing us faster. The crunch of leaves and snapping twigs echoed as we sprinted, each step pounding with the desperate need to reach safety before he closed in. Layla's hand slipped into mine as we neared the porch, and I felt a surge of determination. We weren't going to stop, not until we had that door between us and the nightmare hunting us down. It was quiet, too quiet, and in situations like this, that's never a good sign. My skin prickled with unease as I glanced over at Layla, the last person left by my side. We both huddled close in the dimly lit cabin, straining to hear the faintest sound that might signal our next move. Then we heard it, a heavy, deliberate footstep outside the front door. My heart skipped a beat. The door creaked as the handle twisted, and before I could even blink, it swung open to reveal the killer, standing tall in the doorway, silhouetted against the faint moonlight. He stepped inside, moving slowly, every step oozing with a deadly confidence. He knew he had us cornered. "Lay down," I hissed to Layla, keeping my voice low. "Play dead, don't move, don't breathe, just stay still. He might not even notice us." But Layla's face twisted with a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Play dead? Are you serious?" She whispered back, her voice laced with panic. "I'm not just going to lie here like a corpse." I shot her a warning look. "Look, the ones who try to fight back don't make it. Playing dead is our best chance." Layla crossed her arms, shaking her head. "I'm not taking that chance. If we just sit here, we're done for." I felt a surge of frustration bubbling up. "Layla, we need to be smart, not reckless." But she wasn't listening, her eyes fixed on the killer, who was steadily making his way deeper into the cabin. Like that, my plan to stay alive was out the window. Hey listener, let's talk about survival for a second, okay? Rule number 58. Sometimes playing dead is your best option. I glanced at Layla as she steadied herself, ready to act. Look, it might seem cowardly, but playing dead works. Predators ignore you. Psychos pass you by because nobody expects the fake out. But nope, my friend here, she's determined to give this guy a run for his money, even if it means getting killed in the process. I sighed. And that, dear listener, is what we call a classic mistake. Unable to sit still, Layla sprang up from her hiding place and grabbed a heavy candlestick from a nearby table. She took a deep breath, her face set with determination as she charged toward the killer, swinging with all her might. I thought she might land a hit for a second, but the killer was 2 steps ahead. They easily sidestepped her swing, grabbing her wrist and twisting it until the candlestick clattered to the floor. "Layla, no," I whispered, horrified, watching her struggle, her face a mask of fear and defiance. But it was over too quickly. One swift move from the killer and Layla crumpled, her bravery giving way to the brutal reality of our situation. She was gone. A mix of sadness and resignation settled over me. Layla had wanted to be her, but ignored the survival tips I'd tried to share. And now she was gone too. Now it was just me, alone in the shadowed cabin with the killer prowling somewhere nearby. I took a steadying breath, trying to calm the racing pulse in my veins. I knew I couldn't afford to let fear take over. Not now. "All right," I whispered, clenching my fists and straightening my shoulders. "I'm going to survive this, but I have to be smart and I have to follow the plan. No more heroics." I glanced around, the cabin eerily quiet once more, but I was ready. I wasn't just surviving for me now, I was surviving for all the friends I'd lost tonight. I took another deep breath, letting determination harden my resolve. Hey listener, I know things look bad, but here's the thing about survival. Sometimes you just have to keep going. It doesn't matter how many friends you've lost or how hopeless it feels, you keep going. I nodded to myself, signaling that it was time to move, and crept toward the cabin's back exit. My footsteps as silent as I could make them. I was determined, stronger than I'd ever felt, and even though I was far from out of the woods, I had a feeling that maybe, just maybe, I'd make it. It was quiet, too quiet, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that silence in moments like this is never a good sign. I crouched alone in the dimly lit cabin, the walls closing in on me as the shadows stretched long and eerie around me. Every muscle was tense, straining to pick up on the slightest hint of movement. Then, I heard a heavy, deliberate footstep outside the front door. My heart skipped a beat. The door handle twisted slowly, creaking as it swung open to reveal them. The killer, standing tall in the doorway, silhouetted against the faint moonlight. They stepped inside with unhurried, menacing steps, every movement a chilling reminder that they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew I was alone. I crouched lower, pressing myself into the shadows as tightly as possible. "Play dead," I whispered a desperate mantra. "Don't move. Don't breathe." Maybe, just maybe, they'd overlook me in the darkness. It was a long shot, but I didn't have a lot of options. The killer prowled deeper into the cabin, their gaze sweeping side to side as they searched, every footstep echoing through the silent space. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure they'd hear it, like it was calling to them, giving away my hiding spot. I barely dared to breathe as they moved closer, inching in my direction. Just as they neared where I was crouched, I spotted a rusty metal rake lying a few feet away. Slowly, without making a sound, I reached out, grabbed the handle, and angled it in front of me. They might get an unpleasant surprise if they took one wrong step. They paused, tilting their head slightly as though sensing something. My fingers tightened around the rake, ready to strike. But by some miracle, they continued walking, their gaze shifting in another direction. They passed me by without a second glance, their footsteps fading toward the other side of the room. I let out a slow breath I didn't even realize I'd been holding, my entire body trembling from the close call. I was alive, barely, but they weren't gone yet. "Hey listener, I know it's been a rough night, but I think we're finally getting somewhere. I'm still here, still moving, and if I make it out of this, it'll be nothing short of a miracle. But let's not celebrate just yet, all right? I'd hate to jinx myself by getting cocky. After all, there's still a killer in here with a serious grudge." I forced myself to focus back on the task at hand. I wasn't out of the woods yet, literally or figuratively. I saw my car parked at the edge of the yard through the window, tantalizingly close. If I could make it there, I might stand a chance. Every muscle in my body was poised to run, every nerve ready to spring the second I found my opportunity. But as if sensing my plan, they appeared again, this time directly between me and the door. Their silhouette loomed large, their masked face catching just enough moonlight to send a fresh wave of terror through me. I took a deep breath, realizing no time left for caution. This was it, the final sprint. "All right," I muttered. "On 3, we run. Don't look back. Just run." I tightened my grip on the rake, mentally counting down. 1, 2, 3. I took off, darting for the door as fast as my legs could. My heart pounded like a war drum, every step echoing louder as I flew through the cabin. I could hear their footsteps close behind, growing louder and heavier each passing second. But I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. I focused solely on the path ahead. The car was my only goal. I reached the edge of the yard, my breath ragged and burning. Just as I crossed the tree line, I felt a brush at my shoulder, a split second from disaster. But I kept running, diving deeper into the cover of the woods, branches whipping at my face as I pushed forward, the shadows finally closing in around me, concealing me from their view. I slowed to a stop, chest heaving, breathless and trembling, but somehow miraculously alive. Alone in the dark, I let out a shaky laugh, relief and exhaustion crashing over me equally. Hey listener, if you're still here with me, I'd say that was a masterclass in dodging death. Sure, it wasn't pretty, but survival rarely is. I glanced around, feeling the weight of the night lift just a little. I'd made it to the edge of the woods, and for the first time, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I'd survive this. Every inch of my body was screaming to just collapse. But when I saw the car in the clearing, it was like a beacon of hope. My legs felt lighter as I threw myself toward it, ready to dive in and burn rubber out of here. I grabbed the door handle and pulled, practically tasting the sweet, sweet freedom that was so close. Then I felt my heart drop when I realized it was locked. I patted my pockets frantically, realizing with a sinking feeling that the keys were nowhere to be found. Then it hit me. Layla had them, of course. And just like that, the hope I'd clung to turned to ash. I was so close to freedom, but now I had to go back to the cabin and back to the nightmare I'd just barely escaped. I sighed. Hey listener, rule number 59. Never leave the keys behind, especially if you're running for your life, and don't leave them with someone who's no longer around to bring them back to you. Steeling myself, I took one last deep breath, then turned back toward the cabin. All right, here we go again, because apparently that's the kind of movie this is. At this point, I was well past stealth. All I could think about was getting those keys and getting out for good. I moved quickly, stepping up to the cabin door and reaching for the handle, only to swing it open before I could touch it. And there he was, standing in the doorway with that familiar, silent menace. Only this time he did something unexpected. He reached up and slowly removed his mask, and there he was. Derek, my ex, the one who had always taken rejection just a little too personally, the one who thought I'd ruined his life simply by moving on. I felt a surge of anger, mixed with a ridiculous sense of course it's you. Hey listener, I'm sure you saw this one coming, because in classic horror fashion, the killer must always be someone from your past. Random psychopaths are so last season. Derek met my gaze with a smug grin, clearly enjoying the moment. Surprised? He asked, tilting his head with that same self-satisfied look he'd worn too many times before. Not really, I deadpanned, crossing my arms. But I am disappointed. I mean, really? All this because of one breakup? His grin faded, replaced by a glint of anger. You think it was just one breakup? You ruined everything. I forced myself to keep calm, feeling a strange defiance and exhaustion. This wasn't the time for panic. No, I would deal with this just like I'd handled everything else tonight, with humor, grit, and a side of pure, unfiltered spite. As Derek launched into his tragic backstory monologue, because of course he had to explain how I'd ruined his life. Hey listener, here's a fun fact. They call it the final girl trope. You know, the last one standing who takes on the killer and somehow wins, even after everyone else is gone? I let out a low, sarcastic laugh. Look at me, am I supposed to be some final girl? I'm just trying to get through the night without losing my mind. But nope, apparently I'm the chosen one who has to confront the ex who decided murder spree is the best form of closure. I glanced back at Derek, who was still mid-rant about all the ways I'd wronged him. Is there a horror handbook these guys are reading from? I muttered, rolling my eyes. Because if so, I'd love to give it a few edits. Derek took another step toward me, his eyes gleaming with that sick sense of accomplishment, like he'd already won. I glanced around looking for anything to give me a fighting chance, and there it was, an old cast-iron skillet sitting on the counter. My fingers curled around the handle and I held it up, squaring my shoulders. Derek noticed, his grin widening as he advanced. You think that's gonna save you? I raised an eyebrow. Honestly, I think it's gonna hurt a lot. I don't know where the energy came from, but there I was, facing down Derek. He lunged at me, but tonight I wasn't taking any chances. This was no time for half measures. With every ounce of pent-up frustration, I swung that cast-iron skillet as hard as I could, making solid contact. He staggered back, shock crossing his face, and I knew this was my chance. You thought you could turn me into a horror movie trope? I muttered under my breath, raising the skillet for one more swing. Guess again. I let the skillet fly, hitting him with enough force to send him to the ground, groaning in pain. He reached out, trying to claw his way back up, but I raised the skillet one last time and delivered the final blow. Derek went still, finally down for good. Hey listener, rule number 22. If you're going to hit the killer, hit them hard. There's no point in leaving room for a comeback. With one last hit, Derek crumpled to the floor, finally still. I took a moment to catch my breath, my whole body shaking from exhaustion and relief. I stepped over him, scanning the room until I spotted Layla's jacket on the counter, and with it, the keys glinting from her pocket. Snatching them up, I turned and bolted for the car, my steps growing faster with each passing second. As I slid behind the wheel, I jammed the key into the ignition, letting the engine roar to life. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, adrenaline still surging, but I forced myself to take a steadying breath. I glanced over my shoulder, carefully checking the back seat, Rule 29. Satisfied it was empty, I looked forward and there he was. Standing in front of the car, Derek blocked my path with that same smug grin plastered across his face. He thought he'd won, though he still had control. I tightened my grip on the wheel, feeling a calm wash over me. Hey listener, I muttered. If you ever get a chance to finish the job, don't hesitate. I slammed my foot down on the gas, the car lunging forward as Derek's eyes widened in surprise. There was a solid thud as I hit him head-on, watching as he crumpled beneath the hood and disappeared from view. For the first time all night, I felt relief, the certainty that this nightmare was finally over. As I sped off down the road, the cabin shrinking in the rear view, I let out a long, shaky breath and turned my gaze forward, leaving Derek, and every bit of horror he'd brought with him, behind. Hey listener, that's how you survive a fucking horror movie.
In the cabin deep in the woods we hide. A killer lurks the shadows where darkness collides. With every creak we feel his eyes draw near. Hearts racing as we hold our breath in fear. Run through the night with everything to lose. Find the light, it's time to choose. Face the dark with courage in your heart. Together we'll survive. split off this time. Lock all the doors, we're stronger as a team. In this holiday season